Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, your boss wants your next new coworker to be a child. Politicians are play acting like they care about you. Tennessee workers are fighting to keep right to work, quote unquote, out of the state's constitution. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number. The phone line, the call-in line, is not going to be open during the main show today. We have several guests lined up already, but you can text the program. You can text us anytime at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. And you can leave a voicemail throughout the week. We will be opening the phone lines in the second half of the show in overtime after we go off the radio. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you should follow us online. We're anywhere you find anything online, all at The Valley Labor Report on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, wherever you get your podcasts, all at The Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining member of the program, make a one-time donation, buy our new hat, you can go to our website, tvlr.fm. You can donate at tvlr.fm/donate. You can buy something at tvlr.fm/store, or you could become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, you should get your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to me for more details on that. I actually went and talked to a local union in the area just last week about sponsoring the program. So I am always available to come to your general meeting to talk about the show, answer questions that your members might have, or talk about anything. I just like going to union meetings and talking to folks. So if you just want me to come and hang out with you, if you feed me, I'll be there. That's kind of the that's the trade-off there. Let's go to the the text messages really quick. I got a text last week. Hi, Jacob. Didn't get to watch the 1029 show until Tuesday, and I've been meaning to ask, what temperature was it in Alabama that made you bust out that sweater? And it was not particularly cold in Alabama. I just really like that sweater, so I was very happy when the temperature dropped just slightly below room temp, and so I was able to bust it out. I'm a big sweater guy. I love sweaters, but you can't wear them in the summer because it gets too hot. So as soon as it gets cool enough that I'm not gonna die, you're gonna see me wearing sweaters. So that's the answer to that question. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey is pleading with Joe Biden to lower wages of construction workers in Alabama, if you can believe it. And that's not a joke. That's what the outcome would be if President Biden listened to her and rescinded his executive order about what are called project labor agreements. Alabama Today reported that on October 17th, Kay Ivey and 18 other Republican governors issued a letter to the president opposing his executive order on PLAs, project labor agreements. So what are PLAs? What are PLAs? Project labor agreements are just agreements that the people that want the construction make with unions on terms and condition of employment that workers on that construction site will have. Okay? It's just setting terms and conditions of employment that contractors have to agree to in order to be able to work on that particular project, and they're set to the union standard, generally speaking. That does not mean, contrary to false information that you will see on organizations like the National Right to Work Foundation, they have on their website that project labor agreements award exclusively to union contractors. And they make it sound like non-union contractors cannot bid on PLA projects, and that is simply, folks, that is simply not the case. Non-union contractors can bid on these contracts. They just have to agree to pay the people that they employ just on this particular contract. They have to agree to pay them the wages that are set out in the project labor agreement. They have to agree to train them to the criteria set out in the project labor agreement. They have to agree to abide by the safety standards that are laid out in the project labor agreement. And that's not even to say that they've got to change their entire business model or that they've got to change the wage structure across their entire business. If worker A works on this PLA project for non-union contract or whatever, they're going to get paid those PLA wages on the PLA project. If the non-union contractor wants to cut their wages on some non-PLA project a week later, or even if they're working two different projects in the same week, they can do that. They can do that. That does not mean that non-union contractors have to become union. That does not mean that workers on PLA projects have to become members of the union. It does mean, what it means is that in order to bid, contractors, in order to bid on this construction, contractors, union or not, have to agree to pay certain wages, adhere to certain safety and certification standards, and keep more of the workers on this construction project local. Joe Biden signed an executive order directing all federal construction projects over $35 million to utilize project labor agreements, which is a good thing for the reasons noted above, right? When we as the taxpayer are paying for things, when we are funding construction, when we are doing this type of stuff, we should not only be concerned with getting the lowest price. Because as the government, as the public, we do not have to be motivated simply by profit. We can be motivated by other things. And I think another thing that we can be motivated by that would be good for us as the public, for our representatives in government to be motivated by, is ensuring that people who work for us are paid well, are paid a living wage, can be able to support their family. And that's something that construction workers often don't get. 40% of construction workers, of non-union construction workers, are on some sort of public welfare program because they don't get paid enough. That's not going to be the case on these PLA projects. If they get paid PLA wages, they're not going to need to be on these. And so, ultimately, when you take all of the things into consideration, if workers on PLA projects don't need these other things like food stamps or whatever, then ultimately maybe we as the taxpayer are even saving money. And also, project labor agreements really are not shown to increase the price of a project that much, but they do actually ensure that PLA projects are more often completed with on time and they're more often completed without safety incidents or with fewer safety incidents because of the increased safety standards, because of the increased training that workers have to go through to be on these projects. So these are really good things for us as the taxpayer to try to be putting out there when we are stepping into the market and stepping into these construction projects. When we're building federal buildings, when we're doing this federal construction, highway construction, we should be ensuring that the people working on these projects for us as the community, as the public, are paid well. I think the people who build our roads should be able to support a family.
Right. That's not asking a lot. I don't think it's asking a lot that the state's purchasing power through tax dollars, that should be raising economic standards, or at least keeping standards equivalent to, decent jobs in the community. And what Governor Ivey and her colleagues are asking for is the use of state purchasing power, the use of tax dollars to lower the standards for working people in their own communities.
Right. Exactly. And Kay Ivey signed a letter asking him to rescind this order, which would mean what? Lower wages for workers in Alabama on federal construction projects. It would actually mean that less of the workers in Alabama are from the state on these federal construction projects. And who does it benefit? Big construction bosses, which, of course, those are going to be the donors to our campaign, right? It's not going to be, normal working folks. And this is totally in line with her actions on this issue. She even flew to Japan to dissuade Toyota, which is a private company, let's remember, from utilizing a PLA in their Toyota Mazda plant here in Huntsville in Madison County. Toyota used a project labor agreement to build their plant here because they recognized the benefit that it would give them to have the project completed on time. Right. and it is helping workers here in Alabama. It's helping workers in the state. And Kay Ivey actually flew to Japan to try to get to dissuade Toyota from paying her citizens more, from ensuring that her citizens are actually the ones that are employed on that project. Those are her priorities. And that's what she's doing with this letter to President Biden, is trying to lower wages of working Alabamians, is trying to make less Alabamians actually be the beneficiaries of this public money that's going to be building these roads and whatever other construction projects are going to be over $35 million. So it's very frustrating. And so, as you head to the ballot box, remember that kind of stuff on Tuesday, that she is trying to make your wages lower. She is trying to actually make sure that you're not the one getting the work in her state.
Whoever put this letter in front of her ought to be ashamed.
Yeah. Of course. Infinite Content in the chat says the government should not be in the profit business. Absolutely. And they also say, if PLA rules are in place, how can the state of Alabama use prison labor to do the work? Right. Yeah, that would definitely hinder that. Fly. Yeah, that wouldn't fly. And another, have you heard about the labor war with teachers in the government in Ontario? I've heard I've heard a little bit about that. I think CUPE, the support staff in Ontario, they're working on, they're like, they were going towards a strike, but then the premier, which is like the governor of that province, made it illegal for them to do that. And there's been a bunch of stuff going on. It might be good to talk about that at some point.
Thanks for putting it on our radar. Yeah. I was not familiar with it and definitely want to look into it.
Yeah. Adam, have we got Terri Gerstein in the Zoom yet?
Yes, we do.
We do. So let's go ahead and bring in our first guest. The first guest of the program today is Terri Gerstein. She is the director of the State and Local Enforcement Project at the Harvard Law School Labor and Work-Life Program. Previously, she worked for over 17 years enforcing labor laws in New York State, including as the Labor Bureau Chief for the New York State Attorney General's Office and as a Deputy Commissioner in the New York State Department of Labor. That's our kind of law enforcement officer. Terri, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, before we get into the meat of why we brought you here today, reading your bio yesterday made me think of something. We've had this big issue, and I'm not sure how closely you've been following it, but with child labor in the state of Alabama recently at Hyundai facilities. And our attorney general hasn't said anything at all about it since it was made public in July. And actually, he has known about it since local police informed him back in February. So our attorney general has been aware of preteens working in Hyundai facilities and Hyundai manufacturing facilities with amputation hazards, with OSHA violations for amputation hazards in this state. And he hasn't said anything about it. Just to be fair, in their press releases regarding the civil penalties that are being levied against these companies, against the Hyundai suppliers, both the Alabama Department of Labor and the U.S. Department of Labor, they have mentioned the Attorney General's office as people that supported their investigation. But if that is even the case, the Attorney General's office don't seem proud of it. They haven't issued a press release about it. They haven't, the guy hasn't so much as tweeted about it, right? But they've constructed this entire apparatus on their website where you can, complain if you get censored on Twitter or whatever. And so, I've been saying this whole time that the AG should be more proactive in protecting children and workers from exploitative bosses. But I met with total disinterest from conservative folk on the radio, conservative politicians, or even them basically saying that, oh, that's not the Attorney General's job, that's the Department of Labor's job. And we saw that they've gotten civil violations and civil penalties, and they're going to have to pay a fine. And so there we go. That's the extent of the thing. What do you think? As somebody who's actually worked as a labor law enforcer for the New York Attorney General, what do you think that a properly motivated Attorney General could be doing in this situation?
Well, AG's powers vary a lot from state to state. Their jurisdiction varies, their resources vary, but absolutely an AG's office could certainly speak out. Every single AG has soft powers. They have a really very high profile position of public leadership, and every single AG, regardless of their jurisdiction, has the ability to speak out, to write op-eds, to look at their statutes and see what kind of jurisdiction they might have. Do they have criminal authority? Do they have, are there ways that they could bring a case? I would say, just to give a few examples, there are other AG's offices that have been very active in pursuing child labor violations. When I was at the New York AG's office, we had a couple of child labor cases that we brought criminal charges in. One of them was a teenager who was working at a restaurant upstate. He was 17 years old and his arm was severed when he was working on machinery that kids are not allowed to use. And we ended up bringing criminal charges in that case. We also had another case that was really tragic where a 14-year-old kid working on a farm was killed operating machinery that kids that age are prohibited from being able to operate. And so these are, starkly serious kinds of conditions, and kids are extremely vulnerable at workplaces. And, I don't know in depth all of the exact powers of the AGs in every single state. So I don't know what they necessarily, what the AG necessarily could have done, but certainly an AG who cared about protecting children and who cared about protecting workers would speak out about it and would be scouring the statutes for any opportunity to take action. And I would add as well that this whole issue of child labor, a number of AGs have also brought cases involving child labor just in fast food restaurants, having kids work extremely long hours. The DC AG's office and I think the DC AG's office, the New Jersey AG's office recently had a case involving Chipotle, and they got $7 million or so in penalties. The Mass AG's office has done a lot of cases involving kids that are expected to work extremely long hours. The Washington AG's office as well. And so, it's interesting. We have this labor shortage, and turning to, I mean, it's just horrifying that companies are turning to minors and breaking child labor laws, whether the ones that, just protect children's time and make sure that they get enough rest and have healthy lives and are able to learn and go to school and are not overworked when they're so young, to these laws protecting their life and limb from doing hazardous work. These are, people are surprised to learn this, but child labor is still a persistent problem in our country.
Right. So when I asked the Alabama Attorney General's office, they said that regarding the matter of potential law violations as a law enforcement agency, it's the longstanding policy of the Alabama Attorney General's office not to comment on the possibility of criminal investigations. And so that's what they're saying, why they haven't commented on it. But they have come out and made public statements saying that they would criminally prosecute doctors at the Alabama Veterans Affairs hospitals if they gave life-saving abortions to patients in violation of our abortion ban. So, I don't know how doggedly they maintain that policy. But I think that you're right. They could at least be talking about this as an issue and be using their bully pulpit, so to speak, issuing press releases and condemning Hyundai. And like I said, not so much as a tweet about this from the Attorney General.
Right. I mean, I will say, having worked in government, that there are times when government agencies are doing things, and especially with criminal cases, that they really can be doing a lot of work behind the scenes that you don't know about. So I will say that, and sort of talking publicly about a particular investigation is different than talking generally about like a field of different types of cases. But if there's no indication of involvement or interest in this issue in the past, that's obviously a really, and no sort of public, expressions of concern, that's obviously really, really concerning. And I would note also, it's really in contrast, not just with the AGs that I've mentioned who've done work on child labor issues, but state attorneys general throughout the country have been increasingly getting involved in protecting workers' rights. And there's been really a surge in activity in that area, from suing Uber and Lyft and Shipt for treating workers as independent businesses instead of as employees with all of the rights that employees have, to suing Amazon for really unsafe working conditions, both related to the pandemic and also related to ergonomic and like longstanding injuries, to just like run of the mill everyday wage theft cases. There are now about 9 or 10 AG's offices that have dedicated worker protection units that have staff that are full-time focused on protecting workers' rights. And as I wrote about in a recent New York Times op-ed that I wrote, Republican AGs, meanwhile, are suing to stop a pay raise for employees of federal contractors that was part of President Biden's executive order and administrative action. So you have, one set of AGs that are fighting wage theft and fighting workplace dangers, and then the Republicans are trying to prevent people from getting a raise. So it just feels very stark. So without, the details of this particular child labor case, I would hope that they're getting involved, because these facts are really extreme and egregious and outlying. And I would hope that any government agency in any state that is focused on protecting children or protecting workers or just protecting the public broadly would be looking for any opportunity to have an impact in this situation. But separate and apart from this particular case, just more broadly, there is so much opportunity for state AGs and for state and local government officials to be protecting workers, passing laws, enforcing workers' rights, getting people paid sick leave, so many things. And we really don't see a lot of that from the Republican side.
Right. Certainly, and you mentioned that New York Times article, and so that's a good place to switch gears, because that's actually what we wanted to bring you on the show to talk about. And the article is titled "Don't Buy the Republican Appeal to Workers." And so I guess let's start with that. What are Republicans trying to do to appeal to workers insofar as they are workers, right? You can appeal to workers on non-worker grounds. Maybe you appeal to them in this social issue that they care about or whatever. But there is a class of Republican politician that is trying to make a quote unquote working class case for the Republican Party, right? So how are they doing that?
I mean, I think a lot of it is optics and play acting, and it's through. I mean, the examples that I included in the piece, we have Dr. Oz, who's a bazillionaire, who, with more houses than I have fingers, right? Who's running for Senate in Pennsylvania, and you have him going to the supermarket, pretending he's a regular guy, buying vegetables for a veggie tray and like complaining about the cost of it, and just trying to act like he's just a regular Joe, like going to the store. And then the ad where I don't know how many different guns he shoots, but there's like twangy guitar music in the background. Right. And I've seen people analyze that, and like he shoots and he hits he shoots the gun and he hits something, but apparently it's like he didn't actually hit it, but that's a separate question. But it's just like really using these
now, so hold on, Terri. So you're telling me that you're questioning the sincerity of those videos where Dr. Oz is shooting guns and listening to country music?
I mean, maybe in one of his mansions he has some boss who listens to country music. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of using sort of clothing and using, attacking coastal elites, and a lot of dog whistles, and sort of phrasing that sort of speaks to, sort of identity issues. And a lot of it is, what was so interesting when I looked, what sort of spurred me to write the piece was that I saw a few different examples all around the same time of Republicans and conservatives actually standing up for workers, which almost in U.S. workers, which almost, which is very, very rare, right? Aside from talking about China and like railing about China and how bad China is, like you don't really see many instances of actual concrete policy action that they are willing to take to protect workers. So I saw cases where they'll champion the worker against an employer. So I saw these three examples, and they were so interesting to me. One of them was the case of the public school coach in Bremerton, Washington State, who insisted on praying at midfield very publicly with students in a kind of coercive way for the student athletes, in a way that was not appropriate for a public school employee, right? So that was one, and he became a real right-wing cause celeb, and everybody loved him. So that was one, and he won his case in the Supreme Court, even though he was, I mean, the facts of the case are extraordinary. Like he was offered other more private places to pray. He wasn't fired. He was placed on paid leave, and then opted not to reapply for the job, and then claimed discrimination. Yeah. He also, the school district tried to moot out the case because he had moved to Florida in the meantime. And they said, like, he's not going to move back to Washington State for a $5,000 a year job coaching football. And his lawyers filed papers saying, absolutely, he will immediately be back to coach the team. And meanwhile, there's been follow-up reporting about how the school district tried to rehire him, and like, he's not coaching the Bremerton high school football team right now, right? He's going on the right-wing talk show circuit. So that was one case. Another was a case involving a couple of Kroger's employees who were let go because they refused to wear a heart logo that the company had put on their new aprons. And the heart had like three colors. It was like yellow, two shades of blue, and red. And the company had some kind of like corporate speak explanation of what the heart was about. It was like for our, the red is for the freshness of our food, and the yellow is to uplift every day. I mean, it was like classic kind of corporate interpretation of, whatever, like, and, but these two workers felt that it looked a little bit too much like a rainbow, and that they believed that it was meant to support LGBTQ rights, gay and lesbian rights, and they refused to wear it. And the facts of that case, again, are pretty extraordinary. In their depositions, they were shown logos for a number of other major national companies' logos, brands like Google and the Olympics or NBC, and all of them, they were just shown the logos and they said, yes, I think that is too much of a gay rainbow for me. And one of them even was shown the Skittles logo and felt that the Skittles logo would be objectionable to her religion. And they said that they actually like rainbows because, of course, rainbows come from the Bible and the Noah's Ark story. They said they liked rainbows in general, just not the rainbows that were expressing gay rights. But the thing is, like, all of this is just wild. But then when you look at the actual heart, it's not even a rainbow, right? And they refused to wear it, and they were terminated for that. And the EEOC, led by a Trump appointee, very concerned about, religious discrimination against people for their religious beliefs. The EEOC brought the case, and a Trump appointed judge actually granted the specific procedural aspects of it are not interesting to general people except lawyers. But basically, a Trump appointed judge kind of upheld the discrimination part of their case, and they ended up getting a settlement and getting $90,000 each. So that was the second case. And then the third case was during the time when a lot of companies were mandating vaccinations, and most of them were doing like vaccine or test every week. So, there were other options. But when they were mandating vaccinations, there was almost all workers complied with that. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but people complied. And, I think the statistics are depending upon the statistics I've seen are sort of 95 or 97% of people whose employers required vaccination just went ahead and got it. And a few Republican-led states rushed to pass laws making sure that people who quit or were fired because they refused vaccination would be eligible for unemployment insurance. And, I support a broad safety net for people who are unemployed, of course, but these were states that were really have always been really miserly about unemployment insurance. They had turned down and prematurely ended additional unemployment insurance that was paid by the federal government that wasn't even being paid from within their state. Some of these states don't allow victims of domestic violence to get unemployment insurance. And so you see that contrast of these are the favored workers. We want to make this statement that they get unemployment insurance because they're turning down the vaccine. And so what I saw when I looked at these three, and they're all kind of disparate, right? They're different industries, they're different kinds of issues. But what I saw when I looked at all three is that they're not standing up for workers in relation to the Republicans and the conservatives in these cases. They're not standing up for workers in relation to their wages or paid sick leave or the right to have a union or workplace safety and health. It's all these culture war narratives, right? It's us versus them. It's, the godless heathens trying to, trying to make incursions on our conservative Christian country, or the government trying to make us have these vaccines, which, how all of COVID just got so politicized is one of the great tragedies of our time. And so that was the thing that I found really interesting, was that there's no real plan that they ever articulate about how they want to actually help workers. They oppose raising the minimum wage. They oppose paid sick leave. They oppose paid family and medical leave. When there were the child tax credit that was sending people money every month, that just helped so many people afford the necessities.
Cut the child poverty rate in half.
Right, exactly. And they oppose that. They oppose, limiting the price of insulin, all of these different things that in so many different ways from a lot of different angles really help working people live their lives, and help workers as workers, help working families. They oppose all of that. But then they have a worker who sees a Skittles bag as a front for gay rights, and they're willing to like that is who they're going to champion as, you know, in relation to the workplace. And that contrast to me was just so striking and so, you know, like absurd. And like it's one of those things where if it weren't so devastating to people's lives, it would just be pure comedy.
Right. Well, and you have another article in the American Prospect called The Real Victims of Cancel Culture are America's Workers. And, you know, a lot of these are kind of in line with, like, there's this broader cancel culture narrative about, you know, conservatives are censored and all this, and we've got to take the vaccine, and we've got to wear pride pins. And, you know, I could envision a policy that, you know, actually does protect them in these narrow type of culture war instances. You know, I think that the praying in that coach, I think is a pretty unique thing. But, you know, I don't know. I'm fine with people not wearing a pin from a company, you know, if they don't want to. I think that's, you know, I have no objections to that. And how could we protect that while also protecting other people's freedom of speech? Well, we could strengthen the union at Kroger. We could institute policies that would help strengthen the union's bargaining position at Kroger, so that none of the workers have to wear, you know, these corporate messages if they don't want, or that they can wear their own messages if they would like. And of course, you know, we actually see Republican politicians and attorneys and all of this fighting workers' rights to wear union pins at work. So on the one hand, they're saying, oh, you shouldn't have to wear this pin that's not even a gay pride thing if you don't want, because you think it's a gay pride thing. And on the other hand, you should have the freedom to do that. But on the other hand, you shouldn't have the freedom to wear a union pin if you want. I mean, it's just the only times that they actually help workers as workers is when it narrowly intersects with these weird culture war narratives that they have.
Yes, I think that's right. And that was what so struck me about these cases, was exactly that point that you make. And I think that your point too about how, you know, strengthening unions actually supports everyone. It helps all workers from being canceled. If you want people to have the ability to, you know, I mean, just cause termination. People can't, you know, what just cause termination is, which is included in, you know, basically all union contracts. People can only be fired for a reason that's related to their job performance. And also there's typically a requirement of progressive discipline. So you get some kind of warning before something so, you know, stark happens and so devastating as losing your job and losing your livelihood. And if people really cared about making sure that people weren't canceled at work, strong unions are the best way really to do that. But
I mean, they're really the only way to do that almost. You know, we can talk about passing just cause laws in different states, but, you know, the state enforcement is so difficult to keep up. You know, we've got laws on the books. We ostensibly have child labor laws on the books in Alabama, right? But we've still had children working in manufacturing facilities, and we're going to be talking some more about that later in the show with Sarah Lazare about the, you know, businesses and bosses trying to loosen child labor laws. But if you are genuinely concerned with making it more difficult for bosses to fire workers because they don't like their speech, then that's the kind of thing that you should be championing. More unions, more protections for unions, just cause in the state law, stuff like that. But they're not doing that.
Oh, right, absolutely. And passing the PRO Act, there are so many obstacles for workers who want to organize a union, and all of the recent surveys show massive increases in support for unions. I think that there was a recent study that, a survey that 70% of Americans approve of unions, and about half of non-union private sector workers said that they would join a union if they could. And meanwhile, the private sector union density rate stays in the 6 to 7 range.
Right.
And this is because there are so many there are so many obstacles, and because American corporations, in contrast to corporations in other developed countries which have accepted that, workers having a voice and the idea that unions are so radical and adverse to the interests of their country, of their company, is just wild. Like, unions do not want their company where they work to fail. They want it to succeed, because if it fails, the workers are going to be out of a job. Of course, they want the pie to be divided a little bit differently, right? But unions can be beneficial for companies, and American companies don't seem to understand that. Unions can reduce turnover and have much more stability among your workforce. You can have a better trained workforce. There's some research showing that they increase productivity, which makes sense, because if you're not constantly churning through people, you're going to be more productive. And so in other countries, the idea, a union is just, and you have these employers who kind of say well, we don't, yes, in some factories, in the old days, people needed unions because they were so horrendously oppressed. We don't need them now because we're basically decent. But the thing is, a union is just a way for workers to have a collective voice and have, some collective ability to bargain en masse with the employer. And that should not be a radical thing that is seen as adverse to employers' interests. And again, in many developed countries, it's just much more accepted. And that's just part of the picture in industrial policy and in the economy. But here it's just seen as so oppositional to the interests of companies, which I think is a big mistake. But as we were talking about the politics of it, yes, Republicans have opposed the PRO Act. I think Marco Rubio came up with some proposal that was
reinstitute company unions. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Sweetheart unions, that would be kind of employer dominated. And that's the kind of voice that he wants, that he says he wants to give workers. And so, it's just, to me, it's just so stark how critical it is for people to have unions now. I would take issue a little bit with one thing that you said, which is talking about sort of, I do think that government standards and government enforcement is really important, as I think that that's sort of another important not that you were arguing against it, but just sort of the notion, the fact that there were these child labor violations, it doesn't mean that the laws aren't having an impact in deterring a lot of violations. And a lot of them, there are a lot of employers out there that the law, even if the law isn't perfect, I believe strongly in strong enforcement and effective enforcement of the law. And I've devoted, most of my career to that. But I still feel like having really strong pro-worker laws is helpful, because there are employers who try to follow the law and setting community norms and setting out this is the public standard that we accept, that we expect. I think that's very important. And having those baseline labor standards allows unions to have a floor to then negotiate up from, so if you don't have whatever minimum wage, overtime, paid sick leave, once you have these things required by law, unions can build on that and negotiate for even more. So I do think that those government standards and government enforcement matter a lot, even as there's, imperfectly enforced and massively enforcement is massively under-resourced. But I do think that both of those pillars really matter for protecting workers and creating better working conditions.
Absolutely. Terri Gerstein, Director of the State and Local Enforcement Project at the Harvard Law School Labor and Work-Life Program. Terri, thank you for talking to us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was wonderful having a conversation with you.
Absolutely. We're going to take a break really quick, and we will be right back talking to some workers in Tennessee fighting the effort to put right to work in the state constitution. Don't change the channel.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial, working-class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBEW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know about how viable clean and renewable energy is. To that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to more than thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state. We're working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about our work and how you can join us at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor. And you're listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can send us a text. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Our next guests are on the line now. Kermit Moore is president of the Memphis, Tennessee A. Philip Randolph Institute, and Wes Trotterchaud is the Teamsters Local 519 president and business manager out of Knoxville, Tennessee. Kermit, Wes, thank you for taking the time with us this morning. I appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's great to have y'all. So let's start here, Wes. I always think it's a good thing to start these it's good to start these conversations with some basic education about the issue, because there's so much confusion about this. So what is right to work? What mechanically does quote unquote right to work do?
Is right to work is really the right to work for less. Any state that has right to work laws, it is proven 100% that state will have lower wages, that state will have higher poverty rates, that state will have poor health care, and they'll have much more likelihood of workplace deaths. And that is all driven by big corporation and big business. And we're trying to vote this Amendment 1 down, which tries to enshrine right to work in the state constitution of Tennessee.
Right. And what it does is, it's basically, and it's funny that these are the people that are pushing this, right? These small government types, but it's basically the government coming in and telling private individuals in a contract negotiation, telling unions and employers that they can't agree to have a fair share clause in their union contracts, saying that, people who are represented, it's not even, in collective bargaining states, unions don't even have to, workers don't even have to put this in their contracts. Employers don't have to agree to it. It's just something that they can do. But in right to work states, the government's coming in and taking that off the table, saying that you can't do that, saying that you have to allow free riders in your union workplace, that they have to get all these benefits without anything else. And of course, they're always opposed to the government coming in and saying, we should have this minimum wage, or we should have these safe working conditions, or, we should ensure that the people doing this type of work, have this certain level of education and understanding about the job that they're doing. They always say that's big government, right? Big government intervention. But they love this for some reason. So the vote y'all will be having, what's it on exactly? Y'all already are a right to work state. You've got right to work in the law. This is to put it in the Constitution, right?
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, at the end of the day, putting it in the Constitution means absolutely nothing. It is a law that's been on the federal books and law here in the state of Tennessee for the last 75 years. So putting it in the Constitution means nothing really at the end of the day. But what it does is once you enshrine it into the Constitution, it makes it very difficult for future legislators to change anything. They're not going to change anything unless there's another constitutional amendment that's placed on the ballot. So they're taking away the working class people and the people of this state's opportunity to create other laws in the future by locking us in. And this is all done by really greedy politicians, the supermajority. And then it's also done by big corporation and big business who have bought off these greedy politicians.
Right. We've got a question from Jeb in the chat. When Alabama put this in our Constitution, which we did in, I believe, 2016, the referendum also did away with the state-level Davis-Bacon laws. Is the situation in Tennessee the same over there, or do y'all still have Davis-Bacon type laws in Tennessee, or are those gone, or what's the situation with that?
Yeah. Our Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage still exist within our union, and the project labor agreements and the just the different labor agreements that we have across the state.
So how would, there's some kind of complicated math about how this would actually get put into the Constitution if it did. Talk to us about how the quote unquote right to work side would quote unquote win.
Go ahead, Wes, because like he said, it's complicated.
Yeah, it is. It's very complicated, and it's very confusing. first, the language that they put in, they make it sound like the best thing since sliced bread, but it's really just rat poison. So I'm not sure anybody could support it. But reading it, you don't think, dang, this is good stuff. But no, it's no more than rat poison. So don't be falling into their game. And then the how it works and how it turns out, like if the governor's race if the governor wins, the current governor, and he has 1 million votes, in order for the constitutional amendment to go in, it has to pass by 500,000 plus 1 votes in order for it to go in. So current governor gets 1,000,001 and he's victorious, then the right to work constitutional amendment has to have 500,000 plus 1. If it's 499,000 to 400,000, the amendment does not go in. So really is what we're looking at, and what we're driving to is one, we want as many vote no's as we can get on Amendment 1. And then if people are uneducated and they don't know what the issue is and they don't understand it, then don't even mark the amendment. Just leave it alone.
Right. And so that's an interesting kind of, they have to, their side is going to have to get the turnout up in order to pass it. It's not just a simple majority of the people who vote in that on that specific amendment. They've got to hit a certain threshold, and so that's kind of interesting. And I think that really changes the calculus for for advocates of keeping it out of the Constitution. I think it makes it much more winnable to have this kind of weird calculation in there. I think it's so I'm looking for y'all to come out victorious on Tuesday, Lord willing, knock on wood. But so we'll back up a little bit, Kermit, and can you talk to us about some of the history of right to work? We talked earlier about what it does and what some of the impacts are going to be, but what were some of the messages that proponents of quote-unquote right to work were pushing as this was coming around, as this was beginning to form?
Well, first of all, good morning to you and your listeners. Right to work has been on the books for 75 years. Right to work has an anti-union and a racist beginning. And it should not be put in our Constitution. The Republicans in our House and Senate, which is a supermajority, want to enshrine a law that's been on the book for 75 years. And that would mean that we would never have a chance to repeal it. We need all of your listeners who have family, friends in Tennessee to tell their family and friends to get out to vote and to vote no on one, because it is anti-workers. If we put it in our Constitution, they will sell Tennessee as a cheap labor state. We got workers that'll work for nothing. It is about workers. It is about union. It is about getting our fair share. We need to vote no on one.
Absolutely. And some of that racist beginning was really, really explicit. They were talking about, some of these people that were proponents of it, talking about how if we don't have this right to work law, then my lily white daughter is going to have to be in the same organization as her black coworker, and we can't have that, right? We can't have interracial solidarity and people coming together, black and white. We want to keep them apart, and that was that's a really, I think, an under something that people don't understand enough. That there when we say that right to work really it does have a racist origin, like it really does. It was explicitly segregationist in its intent in a lot of these places.
And that's why people in suburbia, people in the urban areas, and our folks in Appalachia must come together in solidarity and beat this constitutional amendment.
Absolutely. And so, Wes, what are some of the other ways that this that right to work is bad for working people?
Yeah, I mean it's bad all the way around because collective bargaining sets the standard. Whether someone likes a union or whether they don't like a union, we set the bar. We set the bar for the middle class because whenever we go in and negotiate these contracts, it is just for an example, and this is what big business and big corporations wants to divide us on. Example, if we've got 10 employees under a contract that we just organized and only 3 of them join the union and the rest of the other 7 say, well, I want to be a right to work employee. Well, what kind of leverage do we have whenever we go at the table with that company and that union busting attorney and say, we want better wages, we want better benefits, we want better working conditions, and by God, you're going to give it to us. And then that attorney's going to turn around and look at me as I'm negotiating that contract. He's going to look at me and he's going to tell me, you ain't got the support. You've got 3 people behind you. Then I got other 7 that's going to come in here and be right to work employee. You have no leverage. That's what this big corporation, big business is doing to the working class. I don't give a shit if you're Democrat, Republican, or independent, and that's how you vote. That's good. This is the working class versus big corporation. And quite honestly, people need to start understanding that. They need to figure out where they stand. And I will assure you, whenever their livelihoods are on the line, they gonna pick that living wage. They gonna pick their family that they want to be able to live a daily life and live it comfortably. And that's what unions do. Right to work doesn't do that. It's right to work to fire. It's right to work for less. And people need to open their eyes and become more educated to the processes of what big corporation, big business is doing to the everyday working class people.
Yep.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, amen. And we are broadcasting on FM radio. And so, Wes, your union actually launched a sort of campaign getting your rank and file Republican members to talk to some representatives in the legislature to get them to oppose this. And y'all felt like you were initially pretty successful, at least you thought. Can you talk to us about those efforts to get Republican members of the legislature to listen to their Republican constituents about this?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we knew the supermajority in this state wasn't going to listen to West Trotterchaud. They wasn't going to listen to Kermit. We could go office to office and they was going to slam the door on us because we believe in working class people. We believe in everyday people. So we had to come up with a strategy, and that plan was to find Teamster members and that vote Republican. But they are 100% union. They believe in the union way. They want better wages. They want better benefits. They want better working conditions. And they want it for not just only theirself, but they want it for the general public as well, the everyday worker. But so what we did is we took a group of 3 of them, UPSer, Scott Arnwine, a construction guy, Dave Summers, another construction guy named Sean Ray, another UPSer named Marty Hinch. And we sent them to the Capitol to meet with the Republican supermajority in this state. Go to them, the directive, go to them one-on-one, and make sure that they understand that you guys, Teamsters that vote Republican, need their support because you are their constituents. Our guys did great. I mean, they did absolutely fantastic. And we felt like that we had the votes. And we had the votes of the Democrats, we had the votes of the Republicans, and we had the votes of the independents. And that was the work of our members. Well, we get into the final hour, and what happens is they bring in the NFIB, and then they bring in the Chamber of Commerce, and then they go to the Republican Party, and they get them in a group, and they tell them, this is not what you're going to do. And every one of those legislators backed up on us, with the exception of one. There's a guy, and one abstained, a guy named Scotty Campbell, which is a Republican out of Hamlin County, stayed with what he told us he would do. The other ones folded up like a lawn chair because they're bought or by big corporation, big business, and it's time for everyday Democrats, everyday Republicans, everyday independents, everyday working class people to open your eyes. Open your eyes, look at it. This is what it is. They don't give two shits about you in the way you vote.
Right. Yep. We're on the radio.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good, brother.
But yeah, no, I mean, you're totally right that, these people don't care about us, and it's important to understand that, and it's important to, I talked about this last week. I went to the Tennessee Right to Work, vote yes or whatever, their website, and I read off some of the people that are on their leadership, whatever. And if that was the people that was on my leadership council, I would almost just not publish it, because all it is politicians and bosses. Like there's no just normal working people on that list. And if that is the list of your supporters, then
that says a lot.
It says a lot. And, if you're a normal working class person in Tennessee, or normal working class people in Tennessee, understand who is behind this. Because that's a very important thing. And Wes, you said that folks that, the folks that went in there after y'all to change their mind, it was just these organizations of bosses, right?
Yeah, it was. It was all, like I said, it's big business, big corporation. And that lead and guide everything. They're going to tell those legislators what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and then they're going to give us, the general public, all the social issues so we can fight amongst each other.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's working class versus big corporations, and they continuously try to divide us.
Yeah. Wes Trotterchaud, President and Business Manager at Teamsters Local 519. Kermit Moore, President of the Memphis A. Philip Randolph Institute. I appreciate y'all's time. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Folks, we're going to go to a break really quick, and we will be right back talking about those same bosses, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Those same bosses pushing right to work in Tennessee. They want more child labor. We're going to be talking about that with Sarah Lazare on the other side. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. We have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about our work advocating for customers and join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at IAMAW44.org.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can send us a text. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. We're going to be doing a segment about the amendments that are on the ballot in overtime. So make sure that you stay tuned if you want to learn some more about what all is going to be on your ballot on Tuesday. But
for Alabama folks,
for Alabama folks,
voters, we will be discussing the amendments.
Yep. But right now we've got Sarah Lazare. She is the former web editor of In These Times magazine, and is currently editor at Workday magazine, which covers labor and working folks in the Midwest. Sarah, welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you've got this article in the American Prospect titled The Conservative AstroTurf Organization Rolling Back Child Labor Protections. Who is that conservative AstroTurf organization?
That conservative AstroTurf organization is called the National Federation of Independent Business. They present themselves as a trade association of mom and pop stores. In reality, they are a very well-funded conservative organization who has been around many, many decades that pushes for policy that benefits corporate America. Their funding sources are very untransparent. I tried quite a bit to get information about where their current funding comes from. What we do know is that roughly 10 years ago, it was revealed that the National Federation of Independent Business had received $3.7 million from Crossroads GPS. which was co-founded by the conservative consultant and lobbyist Karl Rove. And also around that same time, the National Federation of Independent Business received $2.5 million from groups affiliated with the Koch network. And that, that was reported by the Washington Post. So yeah, so the National Federation of Independent Business is a conservative organization that goes around advocating for all of the conservative causes célèbres.
Yeah, and they kind of act like, like you said, they kind of front like they are, we're just mom and pop businesses, but I think that these funding sources, it's not exactly clear where everything is coming from, but within the last 10 years, we know that they've gotten at least $6 million from Karl Rove and the Koch brothers, and their organizations, right? And I think that that's pretty indicative of, if they were really just an organization of small businesses, they wouldn't need that money, right? Organizations of workers, unions, we don't get millions of dollars from these other organizations, billionaire, millionaire funders. We get it in, a UPS driver giving his union, $20 a week, federal worker given $20 a pay period, machinists given $90 a month, stuff like that. That's where unions get their money from. But at least some, and it's unclear how much, but at least some of their money is coming from these big conservative donors, and they are, and you said, they basically follow the conservative cause, the conservative cause of the day, which is not what the average small business owner would be doing. The average small business owner is not a reactionary conservative ideologue, right?
Yeah, so about 97% of the time, the National Federation of Independent Business endorses conservative politicians, and they have gotten behind a whole host of conservative causes. They sued the Obama administration under the Affordable Care Act. This is to the right of the average small business owner based on what we know about them. I will say we don't have current information about where NFIB's funding comes from. I think that there's a good chance that it still comes from these conservative organizations. They also get money from their members, and I asked them several times to give me a full list of their members, and they wouldn't. So, it's hard to know who exactly is funding them just in terms of member donations.
Right. So let's talk about this child labor stuff. What are the particular changes to the law that they're trying to push?
So this is really nefarious because they are using the justification of the so-called labor shortage, which a lot of labor activists will tell you actually is just a shortage of good, well-paying, dignified jobs. But so they're using the justification of there being a supposed labor shortage to say that we need to allow children to expand the hours that they're allowed to work. So in Ohio, a bill was introduced in October of 2021, bipartisan, so supported by both Republican and Democratic lawmakers in the state. And it proposes to allow 14 and 15-year-olds to work until 9:00 p.m. on a school night if they get permission from a parent or a legal guardian. Just one important detail, this would apply to employers who are not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is a piece of federal labor law. But the lawmakers also introduced a concurrent resolution that calls on Congress to loosen that federal labor law. So essentially what they're trying to do is weaken child labor protections across the country. Having kids as young as 14 work more hours is really troubling. There are studies that show that teenagers working too many hours, especially during the school year, have a pretty negative impact on their development, can lead to behavior problems. Child labor laws were created in the first place on the basic principle that children are vulnerable members of our society who should be protected and shouldn't have to work all the time. And so the National Federation of Independent Business on December 15th of 2021 submitted testimony in support of the effort. They did so alongside a whole host of businesses and corporations. The Ohio Restaurant Association submitted this really absurd testimony where they actually said that having kids as young as 14 working more hours is good because it saves them from screen time, which was a pretty amazing argument to be making. Right. So that's the Ohio bill. The Wisconsin bill, which was actually vetoed by the governor in February, was similar. It would have permitted kids as young as 14 to work as late as 9:30 p.m. on a school night and until 11 p.m. when they don't have class the following day. And it also would have applied to employers who are not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. And state lobbying records show that the National Federation of Independent Business supported the bill. So even though that bill was vetoed by the governor, it's still concerning because that governor is up for re-election, and there's a new governor who's been endorsed by Trump, who is actually running. So it is actually feasible that this could pass in the future. And then there's a third similar bill that the National Federation of Independent Businesses also supported. That one passed in New Jersey. It was signed into law by the governor in July, and it permits 16 and 17-year-olds to work as much as 50 hours a week when they are not in school, and allows 14 and 15-year-olds to work as many as 40 hours during the summer months. So this is different from the others because it doesn't go beyond what's permitted in the Fair Labor Standards Act, but rather it rolls back New Jersey's youth employment laws, which had previously been more protective. So the way the FLSA works is that whichever law is more protective of workers reigns. So the National Federation of Independent Businesses lobbied for the measure. The state's organizing director testified in favor. And so, there are a lot of different businesses that are advocating for these kinds of measures. If you just read local news reports, you will see, the owner of a local Dairy Queen and, I think Six Flags supported one of these measures in one of the states. So there are a lot of different businesses, but the National Federation of Independent Business really stuck out just because they have this conservative history. And one of the things I will say is that they have been using the so-called labor shortage to justify why we need kids to be able to work more hours. But they have been arguing for anti-worker, anti-union, deregulatory measures long before the so-called labor shortage existed. They're in the 70s. They lobbied against the OSHA Act. They were big supporters of the Janus decision in 2018 that gutted public sector unions. So it makes them look pretty disingenuous that they're arguing for the things they already had an interest in arguing for, but using the so-called labor shortage to justify it now.
Right. And they were one of the people, for our Alabama listeners, they were some of the people that were pushing, and of course this happened across the country, they were pushing deregulation and a lack of liability for employers who recklessly placed employees in harm's way during the pandemic with respect to the coronavirus. They pushed a law that passed here in Alabama that would shield employers from liability who recklessly put their employees in danger. Even in the face of zero lawsuits, almost no lawsuits have been filed against people for, having contracted coronavirus at work, because that would be very difficult to prove. But, there should be, if you're, especially during the middle of the pandemic, right when it was first starting, if you're cramming people and making them work in super confined spaces without any masks and all this stuff, just really egregious, reckless stuff, there should be some amount of recourse for workers, and they took that away here in Alabama, and that's one of the things that they pushed at the beginning of the pandemic. And so Sarah, one of the things that you mentioned in this article was that there are other organizations trying to pull back child labor protections, and one of them said that work is a gift our kids can handle. So, Sarah, are you sure that you're not, in a sense, stealing candy from these children in a certain sense, like stealing gifts from them, stealing the gift of labor?
Yeah, child labor is one of the great privileges that children get to have. How cruel of me. The mental gymnastics that people will do to say that it's good for children to work are incredibly cynical. I don't think that, Betsy DeVos's family or the children of the people who are in leadership roles at the National Federation of Independent Businesses, I don't think they're the ones lining up first to say, okay, I'm going to work extra hours or have my 14-year-old work extra hours at Dairy Queen or bagging groceries. They're not talking about their own kids. And it's the same with those workers who were sent into perilous, lethal conditions and then deprived of the basic tools that they had for accountability after the fact, after they were already harmed. It's not the head of NFIB. It's not the, conservative donors who we know gave donations to them 10 years ago who are saying, okay, well, let me be the first in line to be a server or work at a meat packing plant or work in one of the industries where people were dying the most. We know who they're talking about. They're talking about poor and working class families and kids. Those are the sacrificial lambs. That's who we're talking about when we're saying that the labor shortage needs to be filled on the backs of children.
Right. Yep, that's absolutely right. It's not these people that are going to be doing these things. It's going to be us,
No.
and that's why it's important to understand who these people are that are pushing these kinds of things and why we should oppose it. Sarah Lazare is editor at Workday Magazine. Where can people find that and your other work?
Yeah, workdaymagazine.org is our website, and we partner with a lot of different publications. The American Prospect is one of our publishing partners, so this piece that you referenced is a co-publication of Workday Magazine and the American Prospect. And we would love it if folks would check us out. We cover labor in the Midwest, and we also cover international labor issues.
Sarah, thanks.
And we're big fans of the Valley Labor Report too.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to come on this morning. Have a good one. All right.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we're going to be wrapping up our main show now. Make sure that you stay tuned for Overtime. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube, where we will continue the show for another hour and a half or so. And the first thing in the second half of the show that we're going to be getting into is the amendments on the Alabama ballot. We have constitutional amendments to the Alabama Constitution, which is the longest, in the world, the longest constitution in the world. It's ridiculous, the system that we have here in the state. But join us in the second half of the show. We'll be breaking down the amendments on the Alabama ballot for the Alabama Constitution. We're also going to be talking to Mark Dudzic. He was the national organizer for the U.S. Labor Party, the one that was formed in 1996. So that was a really interesting experiment, and not enough people talk about it. But
we're going to talk about it.
We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some of that history and some of the lessons that maybe we can learn from.
And we'll be online only, so if any Tennessee Teamsters want to call in and say some cuss words, you go right ahead.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Maybe we can bring Wes back on. Next time we bring Wes on, it's going to be in overtime.
Unfiltered.
Unfiltered, yeah. We don't have the FCC censors. Hang out with us on YouTube and Facebook, where we will be ridding ourselves of the shackles of the FCC censors, talking about the U.S. Labor Party, talking about interest rates too, talking about the amendments on the Alabama ballot, talking about right-wing weirdos attacking a Starbucks worker for no reason at all. So
don't forget to vote on Tuesday, everybody.
Yep. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. See you next week. All right, folks. All right. We're off the radio now. We're off the radio. Got rid of the FCC censors, so we appreciate y'all staying with us. Like I said, I just previewed our overtime. We got a good overtime lined up. I'm really excited for that conversation with Mark Dudzic. We will open the phone line so you can call in if you've got a question for us. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Stay tuned. We're going to take a break really quick, and we will be right back with the rest of Overtime. Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We are now in overtime, the second half of the program, where we are online only. If you're watching the stream, if you're watching us live, like and subscribe and share, all those good things. If you haven't yet. We've got 14 people watching and 14 likes.
Okay.
That's fine. It's acceptable. 1-to-1 ratio. You passed. So Adam, let's break down these amendments. What's up? What's going on? What's going on with the amendments that's going to be on my ballot?
Alrighty. So let me first say I've already voted. I voted absentee. I am one of the folks working as a poll worker on Tuesday. Never done that before. It should be an interesting experience, to say the least. But as I voted, I, of course, had to fill out a very long ballot and flip to the back. I have a sample ballot here. For those of you watching, you can see kind of what it looks like. Basically, all of your candidates are going to be on the front of the ballot. Until you get to about the bottom right corner, there will be a question about the Constitution. Then flip it over on the back, there are 10 amendments to the Constitution that are on the ballot. There's a lot we could say about why do we have to do that. Jacob mentioned it a little bit before the break. This is the longest Constitution in the world. It is a completely ridiculous document, and we lack home rule in the state of Alabama. So as with almost every election, there are constitutional amendments on your ballot that have absolutely nothing to do with the county you live in. And I'll get to that in just a sec. So polls open Tuesday from 7 to 7. If you are in line at 7 p.m., you can vote. Do not give up. Do not be deterred. You can vote. If you're in the polling place and something goes sideways and for whatever reason you're being told you can't vote, request a provisional ballot and deal with the Board of Registrars after the fact. But make sure you do exercise your right to vote. And on that note, I know that there are folks listening who are probably pretty disengaged from the process, are very cynical about voting. And believe me, I am one of those people. I'm incredibly cynical about the process and about the candidates that we have to choose from. But you know what? Folks fought and died for the right to vote, and I'm going to take it as an opportunity to exercise my right, even if that means I have to write in a lot of write-in candidates on the ballot to feel okay about it. So, that preamble out of the way, the first thing you need to look for is the Constitution of Alabama of 2022. That will be more than likely on the front of your ballot. And essentially what this is a not necessarily a rewrite of the Constitution, but recompiling the Constitution in a more logical order, deleting sections that have been repealed and removing some racist language that is still in the document. It does not change the substance of the Constitution. So let me be clear about that. We're not getting a new Constitution in terms of the practical impacts. It really is just changing some wording around, getting rid of some of the old racist language that is left over from the documents past. Alabama Rise strongly urges people to vote yes. So does the League of Women Voters in Alabama, the Limestone County Democrats, and many other organizations are big yes votes for the Constitution reorder. Flip the page and you're going to get to the 10 amendments I've mentioned. Probably the most publicity has gone to Amendment 1, Anaya's Law, which is regarding bail restrictions. There was a very tragic murder that happened with Anaya Blanchard, and as tragic as that is for that family, what we're looking at is a change to the criminal justice system. And so there are some folks who are criminal justice reformers who are very skeptical of this amendment. And essentially what we're doing is, if this were to pass, it would add about a dozen charges that could make a person ineligible for bail. And there's a companion bill that's already passed the legislature that would take effect if this amendment passes, which sets out the process for the preliminary due process hearing on whether or not you are eligible for bail. So the question is, do you trust Alabama's judges, the current Alabama criminal justice system, the current Alabama incarceration system, to potentially add more people ineligible for bail? The League of Women Voters of Alabama did not take a position on it. I do know the Limestone County Democrats were opposed to Amendment 1. Amendment 2, a little less controversial. It's just about broadband infrastructure, and that allows cities and counties to basically work that the way they do economic development. Very little opposition there. Everyone I've looked at is a yes vote for that, including the women voters and Limestone County Dems. Amendment 3, also a justice-related situation. This requires the governor to notify the victim's family should they choose to commute a death penalty sentence. And this all started because of years ago, I believe it was our old friend Fob James, actually, who commuted a death sentence but did not tell the victim's family that he was doing so. And it led to the person being eligible for parole. That person has not been granted parole, but the family has kind of pushed this constitutional amendment. So the governor, if the governor wants to commute a death sentence, they would have to notify the impacted victims, and if they fail to do so, it could revoke the commutation of the sentence. And Amendment 3, no position was taken by the women voters of Alabama or the Limestone County Democrats. Amendment 4, and let me back, one last thing on Amendment 3. That was the last time a governor has commuted a death sentence. So I cannot remember when Fob James was governor, but it has certainly been a couple decades at the very least. Let's see, Bob Riley was governor when I moved to Alabama in 2001, and James was before him. So it's not an issue that comes up very often. Let me say that. Amendment 4, this one is drawing some opposition from different organizations, including Democrats, including the League of Women Voters, because Amendment 4 says that election law changes within 6 months of a general election could not happen. All right, so the legislature could not make new rules for the general election within the 6 months leading up to that election. They couldn't make rules in August that would impact the November election. And the reason there's some opposition to this constitutional amendment is because it would tie the hands of the legislature should there be any emergencies, like, I don't know, global pandemics that were to happen, that might require some adjustments in our process to vote. We've been there. We've seen that. So Amendment 4 is on the ballot. I voted no. Amendment 5 is about deleting some outdated, obsolete terminology around orphans business. Not a very controversial one. I voted yes. League of Women Voters, the Limestone County Democrats, other organizations are also voting yes on that. Another non-controversial one, Amendment 6, that's regarding local municipality ad valorem taxes. I supported that. Limestone County Dems and League of Women Voters are also in support of that amendment. Amendment 7 eliminates the requirement to use the largest distribution newspaper for advertising economic and industrial development. So the law currently states that when there's economic industrial development happening, the government must notify us, and they must use the largest circulating newspaper in your area. This amendment, if passed, would basically take out that word largest for all intents and purposes. And so you could see some shenanigans where, local politicians decide to advertise with a newspaper that has, maybe 5% of the readership of the other newspaper, just so they could technically comply with the law while being less transparent. So I know the League of Women Voters opposes this amendment. The Limestone County Democrats opposes this amendment. I did as well. I voted no for Amendment 7. Amendment 8 and Amendment 9 are local issues. So unless you live in Shelby County, Jefferson County, or Tuscaloosa County, it doesn't really concern you. It's about their sewage systems. I personally left those blank, and most organizations are taking no position on those two amendments. But there again, that's the absurdity of Alabama's system. In Athens, Alabama, I'm voting on what kind of sewage they're going to have in Jefferson County. And finally, Amendment 10. Amendment 10 is essentially to keep the Constitution updated. So if the Constitution of 2022, that first item we talked about, if that does in fact pass, Amendment 10 kicks in to logically update the Constitution as new amendments are passed. Again, it doesn't change the substance of the documents. It doesn't write new laws. The legislature writes new laws. It's basically a organizational amendment. So, if you lost track with me, I'll tell you what I did. I voted yes for the Constitution reorder or rewrite. That's on the front of your ballot. I voted no on Amendment 1. I respect those who feel differently, but I don't trust Alabama's criminal justice system. I voted yes on Amendment 2. On Amendment 3, I think I actually left it blank because it seems to be a non-issue. Amendment 4, I opposed. Amendment 5, I voted yes. Amendment 6, I voted yes. Amendment 7, I opposed. 8 and 9, I left blank because they didn't concern my county. And Amendment 10, I voted yes. And there you go, folks. Those are the 10 amendments and the Constitution rewrite that's going to be on your ballot on Tuesday. And we were talking before the show, and I was sharing with Jacob that I got to pick between 26 offices. I had 26 offices were on my ballot. 10 of those were unopposed, with only a Republican running. Only 7 of the 26 offices had a Democrat running. 12 of the 26 on my ballot had a Libertarian running. So, but do keep in mind, folks, that you have the right to vote for a write-in candidate. And you will have that option for all of those. I had it for all 26. You have to fill in the bubble and then write out the person's name. You must do both.
Yeah.
So, I don't believe in leaving unopposed seats on the ballot. So I'm sorry to whatever poor public servant has to count my ballot and look at and record all the names I wrote in. But I'm going to exercise my right to vote, and I'm going to vote for people that I can halfway believe in. And so sometimes that means writing your own.
There you go. Your own name or your daughter's name.
Yeah, Ida may have gotten a vote for county commission chairman. And frankly, I trust her judgment.
Yeah, I think I welcome the rule of Ida Keller.
Yeah, I mean, she knows about fairness, sharing, being nice. You know, we could use that on the county commission.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
There you go. There's your voting rundown for Tuesday, all of our Alabama folks. And wherever you're listening, please go vote. I know it can be frustrating, and I know the results are probably going to be disappointing, but exercise your right to vote. People fought very hard to get you that right that you can exercise. If you choose not to vote, I respect your choice. I'm not going to shame you. I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to be mad at you or cuss you or do any of those things because I don't think it's helpful. If you decide that on Tuesday you have better things to do and you don't want to vote, that's on you. I just really encourage everyone to make every effort that you can. If you can make it to the polls, please do so. If you have a complication, vote a provisional ballot.
Yeah. Appreciate that, Adam. So we've been seeing Starbucks workers, taking stands against their bosses, against management, coming together, and they're now unionized at over 250 locations. They've had 300 union elections, or 300.
And I think we have some news about that locally, right?
Have I not mentioned on the show that yet?
I don't think so.
Oh, man.
We got some.
Oh, wow.
good
Yeah.
news to
So
share.
we haven't mentioned that on the show yet. I can't believe that. I guess it just happened last week. Wow, that's crazy. But yeah, Scottsboro Starbucks workers won their union election. Scottsboro Starbucks workers won their union election. So last we left off, the election was stalled at a tie with 4 challenged ballots. And that was like 2 months ago. It's ridiculous that it takes that long to investigate 4 challenged ballots. But so the investigation came up that apparently 3 of them were deemed ineligible to vote, and so they were not counted. But one of them was, and that one vote was a yes vote. And so it broke the tie in favor of the union. Scottsboro Starbucks workers become the second unionized Starbucks workforce in Alabama, following the lead of Birmingham Starbucks workers, who won a blowout election 27-1. So really, really proud of them, really excited about their win, and looking forward to getting some union coffee nearby in Scottsboro here
I'm
soon.
Just really proud for them, and they fought incredibly hard.
Yeah.
It's been a tough journey for them and a difficult journey, and I know they've dealt with a lot, not just from management, but even in some cases from family, from the community. And so, yeah, that's a huge victory, and I think it should inspire folks all over, no matter where you're at. If some young folks at Starbucks in Scottsboro, Alabama, can take on $1 billion corporation and win, what can you do?
Yep. Exactly. Young people, like 16-year-olds.
As young as 16, yeah.
So really, really cool. Really proud of them. Exciting stuff. Looking forward to keeping in touch with them and seeing what they do.
I mean, most of the teachers listening, if there's any teachers listening, they would probably say, I have trouble getting 16-year-olds to put their name on the paper.
Yeah.
They forget to write their name and date.
Yeah.
And these folks organized a union. How about that?
How about that? Yeah. So, but that's not even, and I totally forgot about that, but that's not even what I was talking about. What I was going to get to is that, these folks across the country, they're doing, they're doing this for a few different reasons. Some of the people are motivated to form their unions to lock in some of the things that they like about their workplace, right? Not everything is motivated by just totally horrid, rancid working conditions. Some of it's motivated by, I like my job and I want to keep it. I want to keep some of these things that I like. I want to protect it from, the unpredictable whims of my boss, right? Some of them, however, are to have to rectify long-standing issues about scheduling and things like this. Some of it's just to have a say over future changes. Maybe there's not even a particular thing that they have an opinion on. It's just they want to be able to have an opinion about what comes next for their workplace. And workers should have that. The people who actually do the work for a corporation should have some say over what comes next, over the changes that the company implements. And one of the things about this campaign that's really noticeable is that it is led by the baristas themselves, talking to one another, telling their stories, airing their grievances, and organizing each other. One barista did that last week. He spoke about some of the conditions of his workplace, having to work 25 hours in a week, including 8-hour shifts on both Saturday and Sunday, all while going to college full-time. He spoke about being understaffed, about not having enough folks on the floor during a rush, managers calling out during a short-staffed shift, managers calling out during a shift where there aren't enough people on the floor, leaving their workers to do everything for them. And I think that these are all super legitimate complaints, right? These are all super legitimate complaints. And everybody that's been in the service industry, I've worked in the service industry, I have gotten in, I have been in a place where that really weighed on me a lot, having to deal with all this stuff. I worked when I was in college. I only worked 12 hours a week. I did just one day on Saturday. I would work 12 hours. I would work open to close. And I would have worked 12 hours, and that would be the only time that I worked during the week, at the restaurant. And then I worked like 10 hours during the week, here and there at variously an internship where I work now, and then as a legal assistant. So I know, almost exactly what this guy's going through, and that was really difficult. Of course, there are other people who have other difficulties that may or may not be greater or lesser in degree, but it is difficult to juggle full-time college with 25 hours of work in a week. That's a lot to juggle, especially when your job is not properly staffing. It's when your job is placing more work on you than can be physically done in a certain time period, and putting you in front of irate customers who are going to be badgering you over something that is actually not even your fault. It's not your fault that you're short-staffed. And so therefore it's not your fault that their drinks are taking a long time, or it's not your fault in my case that their burgers was taking a long time. It's the fault of the management who did not schedule enough people to man the customers, to man the demand, right? And so these are real complaints, and that can really frustrate somebody, that can make somebody emotional having to go through all of this, because it's not fun being yelled at for what are, in effect, your manager's fault. That's not fun. And so this, this young man was being very vulnerable, and he shared this story. And right-wing weirdos don't think that's a legitimate thing to do. They think that you should just be quiet and be stoic and take all of the punishment that your billionaire boss throws on you. I mean, all of this, if you look up right now, and this young man is a trans person, if you look up right now trans barista on YouTube, it's disgusting the amount of people that are going on about this, that are attacking this person for fighting against his company, that are in effect what they're doing is white knighting for Howard Schultz, and they're trying to make it seem like they're fighting against the woke elites or whatever, right? Because this is a barista, and barista are part of the PMC or the professional managerial class, or they're not actually productive laborers, or whatever folks want to say. And it's, they're just having a field day with it, laughing at this worker and pretending that his chief complaint was working an 8-hour day. When obviously, if you watch this video, the chief complaint is not that he had to work an 8-hour day. The chief complaint is that he's having to work 8 hours a day on Saturday and Sunday while going to college full time, while being understaffed, while management is leaving you high and dry. These are all the things, and these are the things that they're trying to unionize to push back against. But you're going to see just a deluge of videos from folks like Matt Walsh, from Michael Knowles, from Sebastian Gorka. Our own local right-wing weirdos here in Huntsville did this. Millions of views in totality just attacking this guy and caping for the company. One of the funnier things that I saw was like Matt Walsh saying that sometimes he works 11 or 12 hours a day, and then he takes care of his kids, and I don't complain about it. It's like, yeah, well, I think being a barista at Starbucks is more difficult than what Matt Walsh does. That's a hot take. Yeah,
I'd say so. I bet you don't want to trade places.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And they make significantly less money than he does, working for a millionaire who works for billionaires, right? It's just really, really disgusting. And it's trying to, and all of these millions of views are coming from in in a lot of cases, working class people. And what's happening is that these people are trying to turn working class people against each other. They're trying to tell you, steelworker or coal miner or whatever, look at this privileged guy. He's complaining about this and really, misrepresenting the complaints. This is your enemy. It's not your boss, just like his enemy is his boss. Your enemy's not your boss. Your enemy is this guy who's making your coffee for some reason. That's your enemy. And of course, who does that help? It helps Howard Schultz. It helps coal mine bosses if coal miners are not focused on fighting for their rights at work. It doesn't help coal miners.
Right. Well, and I mean, it ties into what you discussed this morning, and we had Terri on talking about her article and the appeals that Republicans are making for workers. And it's very obvious that they don't see working class, they don't define class in the way that most folks would kind of see it. Class, in their eyes, is not related to production or ownership. Mm-hmm. It's a cultural affect.
Right.
It's a cultural identity. It's as much about how you consume as it is how you actually make a living.
Yeah.
There's certainly a trend within the right to, and in some cases even within mainstream liberalism, to divide up working class people along various other demographic lines or cultural lines, even by industries, right? Pitting service sector folks against the trades, all that. It's just, that's why folks have to understand what class you're in,
right.
and what a class is, and that what do you own, right. Who owns what, who operates it.
Exactly. So we've got Mark Dudzic in the Zoom now. Mark Dudzic is chair of the Labor Campaign for Single-Payer Health Care, and he was the national organizer for the U.S. Labor Party that formed in 1996, and that's what he's here to talk to us about today. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us about this. Have we got... Mark, can you hear us?
Let's see here.
There I go. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Oh, it's all good.
No worries,
we
no
got
worries.
You now.
Yeah, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Right. So, Mark, I think the first thing I wanted to talk to you about the U.S. Labor Party, because I think that experiment in the 90s was really interesting. It was interesting, I think, for the time period that it came up in. It was interesting for, what y'all did. And I read about it in Jacobin. I read an interview that you gave them back in 2015. And then I listened to an interview that you gave to the Jacobin show about a year ago. And I read your piece that you wrote in 2012 as a kind of postmortem of the Labor Party. I hope that we'll get into some of what was discussed in those areas and maybe some other things. But I think the first thing to do when we're talking about the U.S. Labor Party from the 90s is, why did you feel like you needed a different party from the Republicans and the Democrats? I wasn't around in the 90s, at least in a political way. I was part of the 90s. I was physically around, but but the rest of it I literally wasn't. But I can imagine that union leadership did similar things that they do today regarding politics and politicians that really frustrates me, which is not to level with me as a union member and say, look, Republicans want to destroy you and eat your children, and Democrats don't want to destroy you as much, right? and they're a better enemy to have, the Democrats are, and which is more or less my calculation, right? I think that they're the lesser of two evils, and I think that that's an adult way, a mature way to look at the two parties that we have right now. But they put out what in my mind are just really, really gross statements fawning statements about how amazing Biden is and how, the best president ever, or this politician is a champion for working people, to folks that just really, factually aren't, right? And so what was your pitch to folks like that back then that are really kind of bought into the idea that not only are Democrats a lesser of the two evils, but they're actually really good? I love Democrats. What was your pitch to those folks?
Well, we didn't really have to make much of a pitch inside the labor movement in the mid 1990s. I mean, I think, I'd been active in the trade union movement since the 70s, and really witnessed this horrific assault on workers in the United States that began in the late 1970s and would really intensified under the Reagan and the Bush presidencies in the 1980s into the early 1990s. The sort of the symbolic moment for all of that was the PATCO strike in 1981 when Ronald Reagan replaced 13,000 striking air traffic controllers, permanently replaced them, and kind of set the signal that this was open season on union busting. So we, suffered through this, incredible assault in the late 70s, 80s into the early 90s, that at the time we called it Reaganism. I guess now, you might call it neoliberalism. And then in 1992, there was this beginning of a political revival, and a guy named Bill Clinton got elected president. And he was a Democrat for the first time in 12 years. And there was a lot of hope that maybe we could begin to change. We wanted to do some modest labor law reform. We wanted to make it illegal to permanently replace striking workers. The U.S. has this weird loophole in our labor law. It says they can't fire you for striking, but they can permanently replace you, which is, you try to figure out the difference when you're standing on the line to the food bank. Mm-hmm. We wanted to reform labor law. We wanted real healthcare reform. We wanted to begin to make progress. So Bill Clinton got elected, but he got elected by, kind of embracing a kinder, gentler version of Reaganism, or a kinder, gentler version of neoliberalism. So instead of, an opening for workers' rights and the ability to organize and to fight back, he put absolutely no political capital into labor law reform. He totally screwed up healthcare reform by embracing a market-based approach to healthcare reform rather than expanding Medicare and public healthcare programs. And then that all fell apart and got attacked by corporate interests. He attacked poor people and scapegoated poor people, went after people who were receiving public assistance programs, and sort of instituted this whole idea of workfare, that you have to work for substandard wages in order to be eligible for any kind of social benefits. And then the capper of all the cappers was that he pushed through the NAFTA agreement, the free trade agreement with Mexico in the mid 90s. This is something that the neoliberals and the Reaganites had been foaming at the mouth for decades, the ability to remove all of the constraints to globalization and be able to move work offshore at a moment's notice with no restrictions in either direction into places where workers had, substandard conditions and no real rights to organize. And that really opened up the floodgates for this period of globalization. And so people in my world were more than ready to break with the Democrats in the 1990s. And, we certainly had the lesser of two evils problems. But, the real question was, how can we achieve this break? How can we do this break without, completely making things worse during the transition? But this was a moment where, it's an extreme disenchantment with the promises of a corporate-controlled Democratic Party, coupled with a period where labor was beginning to wake up again and fighting back and, embracing some new ideas. So that was sort of the moment that gave rise to this Labor Party effort.
I think that, when I was reading your piece from 2012, reviewing, your assessment of a sort of rising tide within the labor movement of an increased interest in militancy and, that the formation of the Labor Party coincided with the New Voices slate, or the slate of reformers that was elected to the AFL CIO executive board in the 90s, and there was some real interest in, from what I can tell, and from your recounting of it, in some of these new ideas, or even, to a certain extent, going back to older ideas of militancy and organizing workers, that we're seeing, that is in some ways, it seems, analogous to now, that there's, a renewed interest in labor. And so I think that it's important for us to kind of review what happened, because obviously the result of that renewed interest from within labor in the 90s didn't turn the tide for workers in America. And so, how can we learn the lessons from that era to try to make it different this time? And I think that's something that's pretty important to do. And so, what was and y'all did a lot of work before the founding convention. You didn't just say, we're going to be a labor party, in your article, to assuage the consciences of the politically pure, right? That's not why you didn't want to give people, just give them a choice, right? You wanted the Labor Party to be a real thing, to have a real grounding in the labor movement and in the communities where you were going to be running candidates. And so talk to us about some of that work that y'all did before the founding convention in 96 for, the 5 years or more that y'all were working as the Labor Party advocates.
Yes, I mean, for the beginning, we thought we needed to take what we called an organizing approach to politics. That is building out a real constituency and building out kind of political relationships that are organic, and connect, a political party to real, actual people, rather than to a kind of a network of funders and advertisers that American politics has become. So we tried to be very thoughtful and systematic about it. One of the first things we did was we developed a very simple political views survey that we challenged local and regional union leaders to administer to their members, because when we would talk to particularly like local union leaders who are in the grassroots and are, understand how difficult it is to represent workers under this current political system, they'd say, yeah, it's a great idea, but the members aren't ready for it. So we said, why don't you ask your members? So we developed a survey that asked people what they felt about both political parties and whether they felt it was time to launch a labor party. And, we found out that, everybody from school teachers in Wisconsin to coal miners in Virginia agreed that neither political party represented workers' interests, and at the time had come to begin to explore having a party of our own. So that kind of created some legitimacy to begin to develop momentum for thinking about how we can break with the Democratic Party. The second thing I think that we did that was very important is that we wanted to make sure that the folks who were at the center of this effort, who were, kind of leading this effort, were people who actually represented working class people, that they weren't just a bunch of self-chosen prophets, that they were in the trenches fighting on behalf of working people and were accountable to working people. So, we had convened an early meeting with about 75 or 80 union leaders who represented about 500,000 workers. And, we tried to use that as a basis to begin to talk to people. And then the other thing I think that we did was we developed some really systematic educational materials that were based on a worker-based education model, where participatory education, where people began to understand how corporate power functions in our society and how to effectively organize around it. So we began to develop kind of a common understanding of the problems and a common consensus about where we need to go to solve those problems. And that we did, going through the from the early 1990s, right beyond the actual organization of the Labor Party at the '96 convention.
And who were all who were some of the main players in this? As you were going into the Labor Party convention in '96, who were some of the leaders of the Labor Party advocates?
Yeah, so the idea really kind of came out of my union, which was the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, which is now part of the Steel Workers Union. We had just kind of had a lot of internal discussion about this. One of our leaders was a guy named Tony Mazzocchi, who, was kind of a labor visionary. He was probably the person most responsible for the passage of the Occupational Health and Safety Act in 1970, and kind of redefined the struggle for health and safety as a struggle against corporate power, built alliances with the environmental movement. So Tony was a real visionary and had a lot of respect in our union. So he kind of opened up a discussion. He ran for national office on a unity slate in 1988. And one of the planks of that slate was that we would begin to explore the possibility of launching a labor-based political party. So we had a mandate to move forward. We worked with some other unions that had been historically very supportive of these kind of efforts, like the United Electrical Workers, the UE, and the Longshore Union on the West Coast, the ILWU. And then a bunch of other unions began to join in on this. The AFGE, a Federation of Government Employees, Al Gore had, again, this neoliberalism with a human face, had come up with this idea called reinventing government, which was basically, subcontracting out government work and putting a thumb on the backs of government employees. This was supposed to, reignite faith in government, blah, blah, blah. But it was, basically another squeeze on government employees. So they were, outraged about, how both parties had sort of betrayed them. The Union of Railroad Workers, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees, joined up. They had a contract imposed on them by Congress, which, by the way, may be happening real soon again. They had organized, an effective threat to shut down the railroad industry, and Congress basically forced them back to work, with a contract that they legislated on their own backs. Democratic Congress. They joined the fight. As some of the newer unions, the union that became the National Nurses United, at the time it was California Nurses, National Nurses Organizing Committee. They were a vibrant union that had just sort of evolved, into a real vibrant organizing union. And they embraced this group. The Farm Labor Organizing Committee, a group of mostly Latino agricultural workers, joined up with us. So those are the kind of groups that we attracted. And then a lot of, old school industrial unions that had been under the gun, the local leadership and some of the rank and file activists were very much attracted to it. New activists in the Teamsters Union, SEIU, those were the folks that kind of came together.
And at the founding convention, you said that there were 1,600 union members there, and representing unions with 500,000 workers. Is that right?
By the time we went to the founding convention, I think there were 1,500 delegates, and I can't swear that they were all union members, but almost all of them were sent by their unions to be delegates there. And I think we represented about 3 million workers by the time we had our founding convention.
What were some of the things that y'all did at the founding convention? You mentioned that there were speeches, but what were the the debates and the resolutions and the platform and all that kind of stuff that came out of that convention?
Yeah, well, the main thing was we had to figure out what our national platform would be. And we didn't want to, do the sort of laundry list of the left kind of a platform. We wanted to ground it in the sort of concerns and experiences of working people. So we actually had a process for about a year prior to the convention. We went around the country and held hearings and discussions at various union halls about what should be the key planks of our platform. And, it was, it came together with a call for economic and social justice. A lot of the planks of that platform are, things that are just becoming part of the current political dialogue and debate right now. We pushed for the right to organize. We pushed for adequate family leave. We pushed for free higher education, which, by the way, the Sanders campaign basically adopted almost verbatim from the materials that we put together on free public higher education. Medicare for all. These were sort of the components of our platform. And we also tried to figure out how party would begin to function, during this sort of transition period when we didn't have the critical mass yet to do a full break and run Labor Party candidates. So, we developed a beginning of an electoral approach, which sort of tried to figure out what would need to be in place to run effective electoral campaigns that weren't just sort of spoiler campaigns. And we tried to figure out how this party would govern itself, to make sure that unions would have a key voice at the table, but that all kind of organizations and groupings that represented working people would be effectively represented, and that, we would also reflect the diversity of the U.S. working class. So we began to struggle with a lot of those questions of how to build an effective party and how to run it effectively over time.
I think that one of those questions about, reckoning with the fact that we don't want to be a spoiler and reckoning with that, I think is such an important thing that y'all did, that others that other third party movements, and I think, like you said in your piece, that may assuage the consciences of the politically pure. It's not effective. It hasn't really produced results. And you also say, this is from the article again, quote, unions and working people in general have real concrete interests and concerns which must be defended in the electoral arena, even as we work to transcend the boundaries set by the two parties of the bosses. The prospect of breaking completely with the Democratic Party without an established alternative was too risky for even the most militant unions and remains the biggest challenge to any effort to build an independent labor politics. And, recognizing that there is actually a real risk, that they're not exactly the same, and there is a risk to allowing Republicans to take power that will hurt unions and working people and our communities and our families. What was the decisions that y'all made? What were the decisions that y'all made regarding that at the '96 convention, and then moving forward about how to work around that question?
Well, we never obviously found the real solution to that problem, because the overwhelming threats coming from the Republican Party, ultimately overwhelmed us in the early 2000s. But, where we were heading was, kind of looking at what it would take to build power for working people that could move then into the electoral arena. So, the first thing, in terms of how we looked at this process is we saw this as linked to a broader resurgence of a working class movement that went, beyond politics. The folks who won the AFL-CIO election in '95, the reformers, they had a program which ultimately failed, that was they wanted to organize 1 million workers a year, and we felt that if we were part of a labor movement that was bringing 1 million new workers, into unions every year. That kind of a labor movement would be the kind of labor movement that could break through and develop independent working class politics. When that resurgence, that brief little blip in the labor movement in the mid 90s began to fade by the early 2000s, the prospects for independent politics kind of faded with them, because we then had to, as we did throughout the 80s, we had to circle the wagon, to protect what we had against the growing assaults, with the George W. Bush administration and, all of the attacks that took place in the early 2000s. So that was really the challenge, was, number one, understand that the only way you can do this is when you have a resurgent movement that's active all across the board, and in communities, in the economic sphere, and then you can move into politics from a position of power. And then secondly, we wanted to really think about moving away from a dilettantish approach to politics of, we'll just put our names in and hope the people vote for us. We wanted to make sure that anybody who wanted to run as a candidate really assessed what it would take to run an effective candidacy in a district. Did they have, assess the level of union support that they had in the district, understand how much money they would need to raise to run an effective campaign, have a organization on the ground capable of running. If you can't even put poll watchers into every precinct in a constituency that you want to run in, it's an indicator of the lack of serious organization that you would need to effectively run a candidacy. So we tried to take that kind of very serious approach to building political power, and begin to move it. And had we had some more time, had the labor movement continued to grow and expand and challenge corporate power in other arenas, perhaps we could have achieved escape velocity.
Right. You mentioned that in your interview with the Jacobin show on YouTube about a year ago, you mentioned that you don't think that that a Labor Party that's created now couldn't only have unions at the center of it, and you said in your 2012 piece that the Brazilian Workers' Party and the NDP in Canada were kind of, models that y'all looked at. And I wonder if what you said last year about the need to have social movements in addition to unions and worker centers and these other, alternative labor organizations and community organizations represented in a quote-unquote Labor Party. Were you taking inspiration there from the MAS in Bolivia? Because that seems to be the model that they use there to elect Evo and that group of folks in that party. I wonder if that has played into your understanding of what it would take to have a winning political coalition.
Yeah, I think primarily what I'm looking at is sort of the development within the U.S. working class, where the centers of gravity for working class organization are moving to. The structures that make it hard for workers to join unions, are still in place. But the problems that workers face, workers are going to try to come up with other ways to resolve those problems if they can't do the best solution, which is to organize unions and negotiate contracts. So, workers' centers, other kinds of community organizations, insurgencies, immigrant organizing, all of these things have sort of evolved over the last 20 years and matured in ways that, they weren't really there, in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And unions were much more, they were probably double the union density back in the mid 90s. It was probably, I don't remember the numbers, but it was probably, 18% as opposed to 9 or 10%. So unions were much more, even in their weakened state in the 90s, had much more influence within the working class. You can go drive hundreds of miles through the South and not encounter a single union member nowadays. And So that's a reality. And, we have to think about, where you can develop vibrant working class organizations, and those folks need to come together to think about independent labor politics. The other obvious thing of interest is to take a hard look at Bernie Sanders' 2 campaigns for the presidency and how that developed and the support, because basically, while trying to run within the Democratic Party, which is probably the only space that exists right now to do this stuff, he ran on a very sophisticated, independent working class politics program, and there's a lot to be learned from those experiences over the last 6 or 7 years.
Does the experiences of the last 6 or 7 years with Bernie Sanders running pretty effectively, even though not winning the nomination for the presidency, and DSA electing candidates mostly as Democrats, occasionally as independents, across the country in state legislatures and a few in Congress, does that change your calculation at all about the need for a quote unquote officially independent party that does break from the Democratic Party? Or do you think that maybe it's just as good to be a parasite on the Democrats and use their ballot line for a sub-independent organization?
I think for the moment, the battleground for working class politics is probably within the Democratic Party, almost everywhere in the country. I think ultimately to think that independent working class politics can coexist with the kind of corporate power that also exists in the Democratic Party, that's a mistake. That our politics is always going to end up being stunted, crushed, compromised, diluted, under those structures. So we got to find a way to escape those structures. Ultimately, there has to be some kind of a break. We need a party of our own. Whether we take out over the Democratic Party and throw out the corporate Democrats, whether we leave that party from a position of strength, form our own, whether we do some kind of inside-outside approach for some period of time. There's some people like Seth Ackerman at the Jacobin have written some very interesting scenarios around that, thinking about how the legal structures of political parties could be used. I think that will begin to emerge from our own practice as organizers. I don't think that there's a set formula. There's some people who believe that, unless you completely break with the Democratic Party and call your party a workers' party, it's not a real party, blah, blah, blah. I think you have to be really flexible and understand, what is the cutting edge for independent working class politics at the moment that you're trying to organize. Ultimately, workers need a party of their own. It's the only way that we're going to really advance our interests. And that's, it's the big unfinished task of the U.S. working class. And it's why we don't have health care as a right. It's why we have such low union density in this country. It's why we don't have, adequate leave to take care of our families. It's why it's almost illegal for workers to organize in unions. All of these reasons are because we lack the political power that workers in most other advanced countries in the world and in places like Bolivia, have figured out how to do. And we got to figure this out one way or another. And it's a great challenge that, hopefully we can pass on to this new generation of engaged working class activists and leaders who are beginning to come together.
What do you think are the biggest lessons to take from the experiment in the 90s and the early 2000s within the labor movement to build a labor party?
So a working class party has got to be organically connected to its working class constituency. It cannot be self-proclaimed. Tony Mazzocchi always had the union hall dictum, and he said, if you can't pass an issue through your own union at your local union hall, don't bring it here to the Labor Party to try to pass, and expect us to do something. We have to build this that's organically connected to the needs and the aspirations of the people that we want to organize. I think that that's really, that kind of a model for how to build power for working people is got to be central to any party building project, and it's got to be linked to this broader challenge of building a working class movement. And then, I think we just have to be, really analytical about how difficult it is to continue to advance our interests within the structures of the Democratic Party. What happened post Bernie in 2020 was very, very interesting, how the party structures came together to kill a lot of these progressive initiatives, But on the other hand, we have a Biden administration that is more responsive to workers' needs than the last two Democratic administrations were. And that's, provides some opportunity for us to maneuver and to build some power. But, I think you got to keep your eye on the long-term goal of developing a real independent working class politics and how that moves tactically through all these difficult barriers that the U.S. political system sets up for those kind of challenges.
And I think that you said in some of your writing or some of your interviews that the first step to making that happen is really building power kind of on the shop floor, expanding unions, organizing, right? It's not necessarily venturing out into electoral politics before you have that base of power.
Yeah, it's generally the case. Although, we're in a difficult time right now, and we have to contend in the electoral arena, or we're going to lose what little that we currently have. These people who are, threatening to take over both houses of Congress, are going to go after our Social Security and our Medicare, and they're going to make it even harder for workers to organize. They're going to challenge some of the rulings that the current National Labor Relations Board has made to, at least force these corporations to, adhere to some basic standards when you're running a union campaign. Those type of things. We gotta figure out how to be there and how to mobilize in those areas. And what's so frustrating is you can play those kind of defensive games for decades and be worse off at the end than you were at the beginning. So, you've got to couple that with some kind of a vision and a plan for how we can advance both politically and along a broad range of social and economic bases.
Yeah. Adam, do you have any questions for Mark or anything?
Well, I just wanted to thank you for your time, first of all, and for your service to the movement for so many years. And really what I'm thinking about is Alabama specifically, and kind of stepping away from the national scene and looking at Alabama, because right now we have a supermajority, Republican control of the entire state government apparatus and most of the local governments outside of Birmingham, Mobile, and the Black Belt. And the Democratic Party is unable to contest more than half of the elections. And so we're in a situation in Alabama where maybe unlike many other places, we wouldn't play a spoiler. If right now on the books there was an Alabama Labor Party that could field candidates, mathematically speaking, we wouldn't spoil any election, because when the Democrats are losing by 20 to 30% across the board, it's not a big enough pie. It doesn't matter how many times we cut it. So that's what's going on in my mind. And I don't know that I necessarily have a question per se, but I'm really thinking about this experience that y'all had in the 90s and kind of the lessons to bring forward into this current moment, and how that may apply to Alabama, and what those of us here in the Alabama labor movement may need to be thinking about in the conversations we need to have, because we are completely on the outs. There is no working class representation inside of Alabama's political structure. And in our case, the Democratic Party hardly seems more viable than just starting something from scratch. And so I think that's something we have to wrestle with down here in Alabama. And I don't know if you have any, kind of thoughts or reactions to that, but that's
what's really resonated with me in this conversation.
Just an interesting addendum to that, Adam, and that you might find, kind of funny, Mark, is that the Libertarian Party in Alabama has put more candidates on the ballot than the Democratic Party.
I didn't know that. That's sad. I'm not sure. In a sad, funny kind of way, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I mean, one of the projects we tried doing is we tried to launch the South Carolina Labor Party as an electoral party in the early 2000s, and it actually still exists as an electoral party in South Carolina. For a lot of reasons, it's hasn't developed ways that we hoped for in the early 2000s. But our calculation was exactly what you just said. We had the South Carolina, especially in the early 2000s, had a Democratic Party that embraced right to work and other anti-labor legislation, and extraordinarily disrespected its base, which was the Black working class voters in South Carolina. And so we thought that there's an opportunity there to begin to talk about a new way for, what did we call it? Another voice for South Carolina. And we actually, to get an electoral registration in South Carolina, you had to petition with voters from, I think it was every county in the state. So we went out and talked to working class people in South Carolina at places like flea markets and swap meets and stuff like that, and signed up. 16,000 of them signed a petition to call for a labor party in South Carolina. So it's a real interesting effort. It kind of floundered because right as we were getting ready to launch it, Obama threw his hat into the ring nationally. The African American community in particular really saw this as a very exciting opportunity, and then we would have been a spoiler in that vision, and we had to kind of step down and whatever. But the actual act of going out there and talking to working class people, especially in a state where you don't have like structures like unions where you can talk to them sort of organically, through their leaders and things, was I think that's the way we can begin to build these things. And by when you talk, what do they say when you're an organizer? You're supposed to listen 70% of the time and talk 30%. I mean, that's the kind of grassroots party building efforts that I think it would take in a place like Alabama. But working class Alabamans, I'm sure have massive grievances, and some of them are distorted by racial prejudices and cultural things, and they're played by both the Democrats and the Republicans. But I think if you all thought about how to sit down and have those kind of kitchen table conversations with working class people, you might be able to over time begin to build a real movement of working class people that could challenge politically in a place like Alabama. And you're right, it is, you're not being a spoiler when the other party can't get close to 20% of what the main party. So there's not a lot at play there. They're not gonna, the national,
or if they're not contesting it at all. You're definitely not a spoiler if there's no Democrat, right?
Yeah, no, that's a huge opportunity, I think, for in uncontested districts and things, to think about building something and going in there. But it has to be organic. It has to come from the people. Can't just fly a bunch of folks in and expect that the young socialist from New York City is going to have the same appeal in rural Alabama that she has in Brooklyn. So got to really emerge from the lived experiences of working class people.
Well, and I think that if there's something hopeful to kind of leave with, there is a labor movement here, just as there is across the country, that is resurgent, which means new leaders are being formed in the struggle at the workplace and in the broader community. And, who knows? Maybe some of these coal miners in Brookwood and Amazon workers in Bessemer and CWA workers in Auburn, maybe these are the future leaders of a political formation for and by working class people in Alabama.
And I just wanted to, last thing, Mark, you might want to know that next week we interview the newly elected chair of the Alabama Democratic Party. So if you think of any good questions for us, send them our way, and we'll put them on the hot seat.
I might tune into that interview.
I think it'll be fun.
It should be interesting. Should be interesting, that's for sure. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, and you've given me a lot to chew on, for sure.
This was great. It's great to talk to people who are really trying to seriously think through these issues. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely something that we have reorganized the North Alabama Labor Council here back in 2020 is when we were rechartered. And the Labor Council here was dechartered, right? We have tens of thousands of union members in North Alabama. Didn't have a Labor Council. So that's something that we've definitely thought about, just because there's so many uncontested races. Why the hell not do like a North Alabama Labor Party if that's something that the folks are interested in. So who knows? We'll see.
We'll see.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate your time.
Keep an eye on you all. Thanks.
All right.
Appreciate it.
All right, brother. We're going to wrap up with a segment that I forgot to play in overtime last week, the October labor history that Adam recorded for last week. So we'll go ahead and play that, and then we'll wrap up the show. Adam, let's go ahead and play that clip.
All right, folks, Adam Keller here, and it's time to do a little bit of October labor history. So as we close out the month of October, I wanted to take a few minutes to share some of the October anniversaries in labor history. I compiled this information primarily from the 2022-23 edition of Planning to Change the World, a plan book for social justice educators. This excellent planner is published by the Education for Liberation Network, and I wanted to make sure I gave them full credit. So let's get started. October 1st was the first day of Disability Employment Awareness Month, which aims to raise awareness about disability employment issues and celebrate the contribution of workers with disabilities. October 1st was also the first day of LGBT History Month, which celebrates the lives and achievements of LGBT people. October 5th was World Teachers Day, which was inaugurated in 1994 to commemorate the signing of the UNESCO ILO recommendation concerning the status of teachers in 1966. Shout out to all the hardworking teachers who are making a difference in the lives of young people and in the broader community. 110 years ago, on October 9th, was the start of the Little Falls textile strike in New York. A mostly immigrant female workforce called the Red Sweater Girls at 2 textile mills began a wildcat strike to force their employer to follow a new state law limiting the work week for women and children to 54 hours. Several thousand workers participated, aided by organizers from the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. Despite violent police oppression, the workers held out, and on January 3, 1913, they won the shortened work week with no reduction in pay. While recognized as the Columbus Day holiday in some quarters, October 10th was Indigenous Peoples Day, which began as a counter-celebration to Columbus Day in Berkeley, California. The goal was to commemorate Native American history and promote Native American cultures. And I'll add, in recent years, I've seen a significant shift in consciousness around the heroic myths surrounding Christopher Columbus and the true genocidal nature of Europe's colonization of the Americas. It's important to reckon with the real past so that we can understand our present and shape our future. October 17th is the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, promoting the need to eradicate poverty worldwide, especially in the global South. A good reminder of the struggles of so much of humanity, the reality that we can end poverty, and the urgent need to do so. October 18th is the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, which is the primary federal law governing water pollution. The act aims at restoring and maintaining the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. The Clean Water Act established national programs for the prevention, reduction, and elimination of pollution in navigable water and groundwater.
It also set up water quality standards and required permits for discharge and treatment of wastewater and stormwater. Like all U.S. laws, with even the potential to protect working people and our communities against corporate greed, the Clean Water Act has been under attack by capital and the right wing for these past 5 decades, and its future is at risk. And looking around our country, from the drinking water crisis in cities like Flint, Michigan, and Jackson, Mississippi, to the droughts out west, to the ongoing sewage crisis in Alabama's Black Belt, it's obvious that we can and must do more to ensure everyone has a safe, reliable water supply. October 20th is the 80th anniversary of the Durham Manifesto, issued by the Southern Conference on Race Relations, held in North Carolina in 1942. The Durham Manifesto outlined the demands of Black residents in the southern U.S. Specifically, they demanded an end to segregation, as well as voting rights and equal pay for Black people. Keep in mind, at the time, Black Americans were being asked to fight overseas in the name of democracy while being denied basic civil and human rights at home. October 22nd is the National Day of Protest to Stop Police Brutality. The October 22nd Coalition to Stop Police Brutality, Repression, and the Criminalization of a Generation has been mobilizing annually to expose the epidemic of police brutality. Go to october22.org for more information on the national effort. Here in North Alabama and across the country, working class people, especially working class minorities, have been subjected to police violence, and I believe it's important for the labor movement to be clear in our opposition to police violence and work towards a more just, equitable society. October 22nd is also the 50th anniversary of the founding of SORWUC in Vancouver, British Columbia. The Service, Office, and Retail Workers Union of Canada was an independent union established by a founding convention of 24 women. Its goal was to represent and organize occupations that were excluded from the traditional trade unions of the time. Most of the workers SORWUC organized were women. Their legal battles centered around struggles for equal pay, maternity leave, living wages, legislation against sexual harassment, and gender and race-based discrimination in the workplace. October 23rd is the 120th anniversary of the end of the Great Anthracite Coal Strike, which lasted from May 12th to October 23rd, 1902. 147,000 Pennsylvania coal miners went on strike over wages, working conditions, and union recognition. President Teddy Roosevelt appointed mediators to arbitrate the negotiations between the coal operators and miners because the strike threatened to shut down the winter fuel supply to all major cities, obviously creating great hardship for American citizens and businesses. The miners were able to achieve a 10% pay increase and a reduction in workday hours. October 29th is the 10th anniversary of the hurricane and superstorm Sandy. Sandy began in the Bahamas on October 22nd and moved up the east coast of the U.S., making landfall on October 29th near Atlantic City, New Jersey. The storm caused more than 150 deaths and left more than $70 billion in property damage. The storm hit during a full moon and high tide, maximizing its destructive coastal flooding. The storm surge reached a record 13 feet. The disaster should have brought into focus the consequences of climate change. These disasters, which seem to be growing in both quantity and severity every year, disproportionately hurt working class people and continually expose how governments and businesses are ill-equipped to meet the needs of the people in times of crisis. The anniversary of Sandy is a good time to think about how we can grow and support mutual aid networks, because ultimately, each other is all we got.
Day on the Valley Labor Report for our overtime segment. We appreciate you listening. Just a reminder to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Support the program if you are able. You can do that at tvlr.fm/donate or tvlr.fm/store.
But the liking and the sharing and the subscribing and the reviewing, that's an easy thing to do If you haven't reviewed us on Spotify or Apple
give us
or
5
wherever,
stars.
just give us a 5-star review. That helps. Every little bit helps, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Please do that. Consider getting your local to sponsor the show. All that really helps. So make sure that you donate to the coal miners down in Brookwood if you have the money, all that good stuff.
And certainly, again, don't forget to vote on Tuesday. Don't forget, if you missed it earlier, we did discuss the amendments. So if you want to check that out, maybe we can get that up standalone on YouTube by Election Day.
I'll talk to Joe about that.
And if you need some more resources, check out the League of Women Voters of Alabama. I found their guide to be very helpful.
All right, folks. Y'all have a good weekend.
Bye, y'all.